She had $8 left and a dying Hell's Angel on the ground. That was the moment everything narrowed to a single breath, a single choice. A cold night, a nearly empty gas station, a young black woman standing under buzzing lights, the last of her money folded tight in her palm. $8 meant breakfast. $8 meant her child wouldn't wake up hungry. $8 was all that stood between making it through tomorrow or not. And then there was him, a massive man collapsing onto the concrete, his breath tearing in and out his chest like it might be his last. Leather vest, patches sewn on thick and bold. A symbol people crossed the street to avoid. A name whispered with fear. A Hell's Angel, lying on the ground, turning gray, dying where no one wanted to look. People told her to walk away. They said it wasn't her problem. They said men like him brought trouble. They said getting involved was how innocent people got hurt. And they were right about one thing. Helping him would cost her something. Maybe her safety. Maybe her peace. Maybe the only money she had left in the world. She stood there frozen, heart pounding, every warning she'd ever heard screaming in her head. Because fear has a loud voice when you're already tired, already broke, already carrying more than you can afford to lose. Fear tells you to protect what little you have. Fear tells you that survival comes first. But there was another sound cutting through all of it. A man gasping for air. A human being running out of time. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the vest. Not the rumors. Not the stories people tell themselves to make walking away feel easier. Just a life slipping through the cracks while everyone else decided it wasn't worth the risk. She looked down at the money in her hand. $8. So small it almost felt cruel that so much could depend on it. She thought about her child, about an empty kitchen in the morning, about how hard it had been just to get this far, about how easy it would be to turn her back and keep walking just like everyone else had. And then she moved, not because she was brave, not because she thought she'd be rewarded, but because some choices don't feel like choices at all. Because when someone is dying in front of you, you either step forward or you live knowing you didn't. She helped him, and the world didn't applaud. No one called her a hero. No one promised her it would be okay. In fact, people said she'd made a terrible mistake. Because the next morning, the sound of engines rolled through her neighborhood like thunder. Low, heavy, unmistakable. One motorcycle, then another, until the street filled with chrome and leather and faces no one wanted outside their windows. 100 bikers came looking for her. Some neighbors locked their doors. Some whispered her name like it was a warning. Some wondered what kind of trouble she brought home. And standing there, hearing those engines, she didn't know either. She didn't know if they came to thank her or to make her pay. Now, before we go any further, before this story unfolds in ways you may not be expecting, let me ask you for a small favor. If stories about real people, real choices, and moments that test who we truly are matter to you, take a second to like this video. It helps these stories reach people who still believe kindness has a place in this world. And if you find yourself drawn to stories like this one, consider subscribing. Not for numbers, not for algorithms, but so these moments of courage and humanity don't get lost in the noise. And if you know someone who needs a reminder that one choice can change everything, share this with them. You never know who might need it tonight. Because this isn't just a story about bikers. And it isn't just a story about poverty. It's a story about what happens when fear meets compassion, and compassion refuses to move. On one side was everything she'd been warned about her whole life. On the other was a stranger she didn't recognize, didn't understand, and didn't know anything to. No cameras, no audience, no guarantee it would end well. Just a woman, $8, and a decision that couldn't be undone. Most people like to believe they'd do the right thing, that when the moment comes, they'd step up, help out, be counted among the good. But moments like this don't announce themselves. They don't wait until you're comfortable or prepared. They show up when you're exhausted, when you're afraid, when doing the right thing costs more than you think you can afford. That's what makes this moment dangerous. Not the man on the ground, not the vest on his back, but the price of choosing compassion when you have nothing left to give. And as those engines grew louder the next day, as fear rippled through a quiet street, one question hung in the air unanswered. Was her kindness about to destroy her life? Or had it just set something unstoppable in motion? Because once you choose to see a human being instead of a label, there's no going back. And the world has a way of responding to choices like that. Sometimes gently, sometimes violently, sometimes in ways no one could ever predict. And that is where this story truly begins. The truth is, the moment didn't feel heroic at all. It felt heavy. She stood there longer than she would ever admit, frozen beneath those flickering lights, the smell of gasoline hanging in the air, her breath shallow and uneven. Her fingers tightened around the money in her hand, the edges of the bills damp with sweat. $8 shouldn't weigh this much, but in her world it did. $8 meant tomorrow morning. It meant her child's small voice asking what was for breakfast. It meant one more day of pretending everything was fine. The man on the ground let out another sound, raw, broken, barely human. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was the sound people miss when they've already decided not to care. Her feet stayed planted, but her mind ran in every direction at once. She thought about all the warnings she'd grown up hearing, about people who looked like him, about stories that always ended badly for women who got involved, about how quickly help could turn into danger when no one was around to witness what really happened. Fear has a way of stacking evidence in your head. It tells you you're being smart. It tells you you're being responsible. It tells you walking away is wisdom, not cruelty. And for a moment, she almost believed it. She glanced toward the gas station door, half expecting someone else to step in, someone better equipped, someone with more money, more confidence, more room for risk. But the door stayed closed. The world kept moving without noticing. Cars passed on the road beyond the lot, headlights sweeping over the scene and disappearing, like brief acknowledgments that didn't linger long enough to matter. She realized then that no one was coming. The man's chest rose, then stuttered, then barely moved at all. His eyes fluttered, unfocused, searching for something to hold on to. Not help, not mercy, just air. Her instinct screamed at her to run. Not because she was heartless, but because she was human. Because she knew what it meant to lose something you couldn't replace. Because she had already lost too much to gamble with what little she had left. Her heart beat faster, harder, as if trying to push her body in one direction while her mind pulled in another. Every step toward him felt like a step away from her child. Every second she stayed felt like another risk stacking up against her. She whispered to herself without realizing it. Just one more second. Just breathe. Just think. But thinking was the problem. Because instinct doesn't argue. Instinct doesn't negotiate. Instinct recognizes a moment for what it is and demands an answer. And deep down, beneath the fear and the doubt and the weight of everything she couldn't afford to lose, she already knew the truth. If she walked away, she would carry that sound with her forever. The gasping, the silence that would follow, the knowledge that she had been close enough to help and didn't. Her fingers loosened slightly around the money, not enough to let go, just enough to remind herself it was real, that the cost was real, that whatever happened next would be hers to live with. Somewhere inside her, a memory stirred, not a clear one, just a feeling of someone once needing help and not getting it, of a moment that couldn't be undone, of regret that lingered longer than fear ever could. She swallowed hard. This wasn't about him. Not really. Not about the vest or the patches or the life he'd lived. It was about who she would be when no one was watching. About what kind of story she would tell herself years from now when she replayed this night in her head. The wind brushed past her, cold against her skin, carrying the distant hum of the road. Time stretched thin, fragile, like it might snap if she waited too long. And in that suspended space between fear and instinct, something quiet but unshakable took root. That $8 would be remembered by people she'd never met. She didn't know how. She didn't know when. She didn't know why that thought even crossed her mind. It wasn't logic. It wasn't hope. It was just a strange certainty that settled in her chest, heavy and calm at the same time. Her body leaned forward before she consciously decided to move. Not rushing, not dramatic, just a small shift that changed everything. Behind her, the gas station remained silent. Ahead of her, the man struggled for breath. And inside her, two forces collided. Fear begging her to protect what little she had, and instinct urging her to see the moment for what it truly was. A line she could not uncross. A choice that would not wait. And as she took that first step closer, the night seemed to hold its breath, as if even the world understood that once this moment passed, nothing would ever feel quite the same again. Before that night, her life moved in a quiet rhythm most people never notice. It began before sunrise. Every day, with an alarm she silenced quickly so it wouldn't wake her child. She would sit on the edge of the bed for a moment, letting the weight of the day settle onto her shoulders before she stood up. The apartment was small, worn, but clean. The kind of place you keep together with effort instead of money. In the kitchen, she opened the cabinet and did the same calculation she always did. A half-empty box of cereal. Enough milk for one bowl, if she stretched it carefully. She poured slowly, watching the flakes rise, stopping just before it became too much. She never made a bowl for herself. There wasn't enough, and she'd learned long ago how to ignore that hollow feeling in her stomach. Her daughter padded in barefoot, hair still messy from sleep, eyes heavy but bright. That smile alone was enough to keep her standing some mornings. She kissed the top of her child's head, asked about school, listened to stories she'd already heard a dozen times. She nodded and smiled like this was normal, like it wasn't a small miracle they made it work at all. After that came long walks. Her car had been gone for weeks, sitting somewhere she couldn't afford to reach yet. So she walked, miles at a time. Morning job first, then the second one later in the day. Worn shoes with thinning soles slapped softly against cracked sidewalks. She learned which streets were safe, which shortcuts shaved off precious minutes, which corners to avoid after dark. 2 jobs meant 2 versions of herself. At one, she folded other people's clothes, her hands moving on autopilot while her mind stayed focused on bills, dates, and numbers that never quite lined up. At the other, she served strangers coffee and smiles, listening to their complaints, their jokes, their stories, even when her feet burned and her back ached so badly she wondered if she'd feel normal again. She didn't complain. Not out loud, anyway. She had learned that from her grandmother, the woman who raised her when the world had already shown its rough edges too early. Her grandmother used to say that dignity was something no one could take from you unless you handed it over. That kindness didn't require permission or wealth. That sometimes the only thing you had left to give was how you treated another person. Those words stayed with her, even when everything else felt like it was slipping. At night, when her child finally slept, she'd sit at the small table and count again. Rent, utilities, medicine, food. Every dollar had a job before it even reached her hands. There was no room for mistakes. No safety net waiting underneath. Just careful steps forward and the hope that tomorrow wouldn't demand more than she could give. And still she endured. Not loudly, not proudly, just steadily. That night had started the same way. Long hours, tired legs, a pocket that felt lighter than it should. She walked home under streetlights that flickered like they might give up at any moment, the city quieter than usual, almost watchful. The air was cold enough to sting, sharp enough to keep her alert even when exhaustion begged her to slow down. It was in that stillness, moving from the softness of home routines into the harshness of night streets, that her life intersected with something she hadn't planned for. Something no amount of budgeting or discipline could have prepared her for. Because all the careful systems she'd built, counting cereal, stretching miles, holding herself together, were designed to survive predictable hardship. They weren't designed for moments that demanded courage instead of calculation. And yet, everything she was had been quietly shaping her for that exact test. The woman standing in that gas station parking lot wasn't reckless. She wasn't naive. She was someone who understood cost better than most. Someone who knew what it meant to sacrifice silently and still show up the next day. Which is why that choice mattered. It wasn't made by someone with excess. It was made by someone with almost nothing. And if you're still listening right now, if this story feels uncomfortably close to something you recognize, let me say this gently. If you believe doing the right thing shouldn't depend on how much money you have, stay with this story. Because what happened next didn't just test her kindness. It tested everything she thought she knew about fear, about judgment, and about how the world responds when someone with nothing chooses to give anyway. The gas station came into view like a small island of light in the dark. She hadn't planned to stop there. It was just along the way, a familiar landmark on her walk home. The kind of place you pass without thinking, without stopping long enough for anything to matter. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, buzzing softly, flickering just enough to feel unreliable. The air smelled of fuel and stale coffee. She stepped onto the concrete and slowed her pace, more out of habit than intention. That's when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was uneven, strained, like someone trying to breathe through water. She turned her head, scanning the lot, and saw him leaning against a motorcycle under one of the lights. A big man, broad shoulders, thick arms inked from wrist to shoulder, black leather vest heavy with patches. Then his knees buckled. He reached for his chest, as if surprised by the pain, as if his body had betrayed him without warning. He took a step forward and missed the ground entirely, collapsing hard onto the concrete. The sound of his body hitting echoed sharper than it should have. She stopped short. Her first instinct was distance. Step back. Keep moving. This wasn't her place. This wasn't her business. The story she'd heard all her life rushed forward uninvited. Men like that were dangerous. Men like that didn't get helped by strangers. Men like that brought consequences. The gas station door opened. A man stepped out, glanced once at the biker on the ground, then looked at her. His expression wasn't concerned. It was annoyed. "Don't get involved," he said flatly, already shaking his head. "Those guys are nothing but trouble." Another customer passed by, slowed just enough to take in the scene, then kept walking. He didn't even stop, just muttered something under his breath and drove off, as if acknowledging what was happening was riskier than pretending it wasn't. She stood there, heart racing, caught between motion and paralysis. The biker gasped again, louder this time, his chest rising unevenly. His lips were beginning to lose color. His eyes flickered, unfocused, searching the night for something solid. "Someone should call for help," she said, her voice thinner than she expected. The man by the door shrugged. "Not my problem." That was when the fear shifted, because it wasn't abstract anymore. It wasn't about reputation or rumors or what people might say. It was about time, about seconds draining away while everyone waited for someone else to act. She pulled her phone from her pocket with shaking hands and dialed. One-bar signal. The call rang once, twice, then dropped. She tried again. Nothing. The screen went dark. Her chest tightened. The biker's breathing stuttered, then slowed. His hand twitched against the concrete. He made a sound that didn't sound like pain anymore. It sounded like surrender. She looked at the money in her hand. $8. She could still walk away. She could still protect the little world she'd worked so hard to hold together. No one would stop her. No one would blame her. In fact, most of them would say she was smart. But then she imagined the walk home, the quiet apartment, lying awake, replaying this moment over and over, wondering if $8 was really worth a life. She moved, not fast, not confidently, but with a certainty that surprised even her. She pushed open the gas station door and went inside. Her eyes scanned the shelves, landing on the aspirin, then the water. She grabbed both and rushed to the counter, setting them down hard. "How much?" she asked. The man barely looked up. He named the price. She didn't argue. She handed over the bills, every last one. The money was gone before she could second-guess herself. She was already back on her knees beside him when she opened the bottle. Her hand shook as she tipped tablets in her palm. "Hey," she said softly, leaning close. "I need you to stay with me." His eyes fluttered open. He tried to speak. No sound came out. She guided the aspirin to his mouth, urged him to chew, held the water to his lips. His fingers brushed her wrist, weak but present, like he was anchoring himself to the only thing keeping him here. Sirens wailed in the distance, faint but real. She didn't know if they were coming for him or passing by on some other call. Time stretched thin, brittle, ready to snap. Later, he would say something that stayed with her. He would say that most people cross the street when they see us. That night, she didn't cross anything. She knelt on cold concrete and held a stranger's life steady with $8 and a decision she couldn't take back. And as the seconds ticked by, with help uncertain and fear pressing in from all sides, she realized something terrifying and simple. Whatever happened next, there was no going back. By the time the night finally released her, her hands were still shaking. The sirens had come and gone, swallowing the gas station in red and blue light before fading back into the dark. Voices blurred together. Boots moved fast. Someone asked her questions she barely remembered answering. And then, just as suddenly, it was over. The lot emptied. The lights kept buzzing. The world slipped back into its usual indifference. She stood there for a moment longer, staring at the spot on the concrete where he'd been lying. A dark stain marked the place where his body had rested, as if the night itself had absorbed what had happened and wasn't ready to let it go. She looked down at her hands. Empty. The $8 were gone. Not misplaced. Not borrowed. Gone. The weight of that realization hit harder now that the urgency had passed. There was no adrenaline left to carry her forward. Just reality settling in, slow and heavy. She started walking. The streets felt different on the way home. Quieter. Longer. Every sound made her flinch. Footsteps behind her. A car slowing at an intersection. The low hum of an engine somewhere in the distance. Her mind replayed everything in brutal detail, second-guessing each choice now that there was time of doubt. What if she'd misread the situation? What if getting involved put her name somewhere it shouldn't be? What if helping him brought trouble straight to her door? Regret crept in, not because she'd helped, but because helping always came with a price, and she had already paid so much. She thought about the morning, about her child asking for breakfast, about having to explain why there was less than usual, about stretching another day thinner than it should be stretched. Fear tightened her chest in a way no cold night ever could. Halfway home, she heard it. The sound of a motorcycle pulling alongside her, slow, controlled. Her body tensed instantly. Every warning she'd ignored earlier came rushing back, louder now. She kept walking, refusing to look, telling herself to stay calm. The bike stopped. A man stepped off, younger, still wearing a vest, but his expression wasn't angry. It was shaken, grateful, almost reverent. "You're the one," he said quietly. She turned, ready to run if she had to. "I didn't do anything wrong," she said, her voice firm despite the fear in her chest. He held up his hands. "No, you saved his life." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a wallet thick with cash, already starting to count. "Let me give you something," he said, "for what you did." Her answer came faster than her fear. "No." He paused, surprised. "You don't understand." "Understand," she said, stepping back. "I didn't help him for money." The man studied her for a long moment, like he was trying to solve a puzzle that didn't make sense. Slowly, he put the cash away. Then he reached into his jacket again, this time pulling out a simple business card. No name, just a number, and a small symbol she didn't recognize. "He's going to want to thank you," the man said. "Please, call this tomorrow." She took the card without promise, already planning to forget it existed. "I'll think about it." As the biker rode away, she stood there alone again, the card warm in her hand, her heart pounding. She had no idea who the man she helped was. No idea what that symbol meant. No idea why the look in that biker's eyes felt heavier than the fear she'd just outrun. She finished the walk home in silence. That night, she lay awake listening to her child breathe, staring at the ceiling, the business card resting on the nightstand like an unanswered question. She wondered if helping someone should ever come with conditions, if kindness should ever require permission, if doing the right thing should depend on who someone is or what they can give you in return. And if you're listening to this right now, ask yourself the same thing. If you think helping someone shouldn't come with conditions, comment kindness first, because she didn't know it yet, but the choice she made without knowing who he was about to matter more than anything else she'd ever done. By morning, the story was no longer hers. It traveled faster than she ever could. She felt it before anyone said a word. The air in the hallway felt tighter when she stepped outside. Doors that usually stayed open a crack were shut. Curtains shifted then went still. Neighbors who once nodded in passing now looked away or looked too long, tried to decide what they were seeing. Someone had talked. By the time she walked her child to school, whispers followed her like shadows. Low voices, half sentences that stopped when she turned around. A woman across the street leaned close to another and shook her head. A man loading his car stared openly, his expression hard, accusing. She heard fragments as she passed. That's her. Helping bikers now. I told you that wasn't a good idea. Those people don't forget. At the corner, an older neighbor finally said it out loud. You need to be careful, she warned, not unkindly, but not gently either. People like that don't just say thank you and move on. You've got a child to think about. She nodded because arguing felt pointless, because part of her wondered if they were right. At work, it was worse. Someone had posted a video, grainy footage from across the street, her standing near motorcycles, a caption that didn't bother with facts, only fear. The comments came fast, some curious, many cruel, most confident in judgments made without knowing a single detail. She brought that on herself. Why would anyone help a Hell's Angel? Hope she knows what she's dealing with. She stared at the screen longer than she should have, each word pressing down harder than the last. Doubt settled in quietly, not all at once, but in layers. Had she been reckless? Naive? Had she put her child in danger for a stranger who would never think about her again? That thought hurt more than she expected, because she didn't regret helping him. Not really. What scared her was the possibility that kindness might not be enough, that doing the right thing could still end badly, that maybe the world punished people who stepped out of line, even when their intentions were pure. By the afternoon, she felt smaller than she had in years. She kept her head down, avoided eye contact, answered questions with polite deflection. When she was alone, the doubts got louder. She replayed the gas station again, but this time fear rewrote the ending. What if the sirens hadn't come? What if the wrong person had seen her kneeling there? What if her neighbors were right? She held her child a little closer that night, listened harder to every sound outside. The distant rumble of engines no longer sounded neutral. It sounded like a warning. She pulled the business card from her pocket again, turning it over and over. That symbol stared back at her, silent, offering no explanation. She thought about throwing it away, ending whatever connection she'd unknowingly created, going back to being invisible. For the first time since that night, regret tried to take root. Not regret for helping him, but regret for being seen doing it. Isolation has a way of making you doubt even your strongest convictions. It convinces you that standing alone means you're standing wrong, that if enough people disapprove, you must have missed something important. She sat on the edge of her bed long after her child fell asleep, phone in her hand, heart heavy, wondering if she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. But while she was being judged, decisions were being made elsewhere. Conversations she couldn't hear were happening behind closed doors. Names were being spoken in rooms she'd never enter. A choice she made with trembling hands was being weighed by people who understood exactly what it meant. She didn't know it yet. All she knew was that the silence around her felt louder than any engine ever could. And as fear pressed in from all sides, one question echoed through her mind, unanswered. Had she just changed her life for the worse? Or was the hardest part simply waiting for the truth to arrive? The sound came before the light, a low rumble at first, so deep it felt more like pressure than noise. It slipped through the early morning air and pressed against the windows, vibrating the walls, stirring something primal in the chest. For a brief moment, there was confusion, then recognition. Engines. She sat up in bed, heart racing, listening as the sound grew louder. One engine became many. The rhythm wasn't chaotic. It was controlled, steady, intentional, the kind of sound that doesn't pass through a street by accident. Outside, silence broke apart. Doors opened and slammed shut just as quickly. Curtains snapped back, then closed again. Someone shouted from down the block. Another voice answered, sharp with panic. The rumble swelled, rolling closer until it seemed to wrap around the entire street, filling every empty space. She moved to the window. Her breath caught. Motorcycles lined the road as far as she could see, chrome and black, parked in perfect formation. Men and women stood beside them, still, watchful, leather vests dark against the morning light. 100 of them, maybe more. No shouting, no revving, just presence. Her child appeared beside her, sleepy and confused. "Mommy," she whispered, clutching her shirt. "What's that noise?" Before she could answer, someone knocked hard on the door across the hall. Another door opened. Raised voices spilled into the air. "Call the police. This is your fault. She brought them here." By the time she stepped outside, the street was alive with fear. Neighbors clustered in small groups, eyes wide, voices overlapping. Phones were already in hands, some dialing, some recording. The story had grown teeth overnight. An older man pointed at her, his face tight with anger. "This is on you," he said. "You did this." A woman pulled her children closer, glaring. "We told you not to get involved." The words hit harder now, amplified by the scene unfolding around them. Accusation settled onto her shoulders like a physical weight. She wanted to explain, to say she hadn't known, that she'd only tried to help. But fear doesn't wait for explanations. It needs someone to blame. The engines cut off, one by one. The sudden quiet was worse than the noise. It fell heavy and complete, as if the street itself was holding its breath. Every conversation stopped. Even the birds seemed to disappear. All that remained was the sound of her own pulse in her ears. A figure stepped forward from the line of bikes. Not fast, not aggressive, calm, measured. Her child squeezed her hand tighter. "This is it," someone muttered behind her. She braced herself. The man stopped a few feet away and raised his hands, palms open. His voice, when he spoke, was steady. "We're not here to cause trouble." No one responded. Another step forward. "We're not here for revenge." That word hung in the air, heavy with expectation. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Confusion replaced panic, but only slightly. People didn't relax. They didn't trust it. Fear doesn't dissolve that easily. The man turned his gaze to her. For a split second, every doubt she'd carried came rushing back. Every warning, every whisper, every comment telling her she'd made a mistake. Then he spoke her name. Not loudly, not harshly, just clearly like it mattered. "We're here because of you." Her stomach dropped. Neighbors turned to look at her again, this time with something sharper than anger. Suspicion, curiosity, fear mixed with disbelief. The man took another step back, giving her space instead of closing it. "2 nights ago," he said, addressing the street, "a woman on this block stopped to help someone everyone else walked past." A few heads turned toward the motorcycles, then back to her. She didn't know who he was, the man continued. She didn't ask for anything. She used the last of what she had because a life was on the line. The street stayed silent. Her mind struggled to catch up. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. This wasn't the ending fear had prepared her for. The man nodded once, almost himself. "We're here to return that kindness." The shift was subtle but undeniable. Fear didn't vanish, but it cracked. Just enough for something else to seep through. Confusion, curiosity, a dawning realization that maybe, just maybe, this moment wasn't what everyone had assumed. She felt her child relax slightly at her side, still wary but no longer trembling. The engine stayed silent. The bikers stayed still. And for the first time since that night, she realized something important. Whatever was about to happen, it wasn't punishment. And that understanding, fragile as it was, changed the shape of everything that came next. The man who had spoken stepped aside, and another figure moved forward. He walked slower than the rest, his posture careful, like someone whose body was still remembering pain. Broad shoulders, gray threaded through his beard. The same vest, the same presence, but now his eyes were clear, steady, fixed on her alone. The street seemed to shrink around him. She recognized him instantly, not from the vest, not from the rumors, from the way he breathed, from the shape of his face when he struggled for air, from a memory that had followed her home and haunted her sleep. He was the man from the gas station. A murmur rippled through the neighbors. Shock replaced fear, disbelief replacing accusation. The pieces began to shift, rearranging themselves into a picture no one had expected. He stopped a few feet in front of her and rested a hand against the back of a parked motorcycle, grounding himself before he spoke. I didn't get a chance to thank you that night, he said quietly. Her throat tightened. She tried to answer, but no sound came out. My name's Hawk, he continued, turning slightly so the others could hear. And if you hadn't stopped, if you hadn't spent your last $8 when nobody else would, I wouldn't be standing here. The words hit the street like a wave. Someone gasped. Another neighbor covered their mouth. The man who had blamed her earlier lowered his eyes, suddenly unable to meet her gaze. Hawk took a breath, steadying himself. I've worn this vest a long time, he said. Long enough to know what people see when they look at it. Fear, assumptions, reasons to walk away. His eyes returned to her. She didn't see any of that. She saw a man dying. Tears blurred her vision before she could stop them. She shook her head slightly, as if to say it wasn't a big thing, as if she could still shrink the moment back down to size. But Hawk wasn't finished. Years ago, he said, his voice tightening just a little, I lost my daughter. Leukemia. We didn't get help fast enough. By the time we had the money, it was too late. The street stayed silent, not out of fear now, but respect. I built something out of that loss, he went on. A nonprofit. We help families who fall through cracks. Medical bills, housing, food, work. People who do everything right and still come up short. He paused. It's called Lily's Legacy. The name carried weight. A few neighbors nodded slowly. Someone whispered, recognizing it. The fear that had ruled the morning gave way to something heavier. Realization. Hawk gestured around him. These people didn't come here for revenge. They came because when one of us is shown real kindness, especially by someone with nothing, we don't forget it. He turned back to her and reached into his jacket, pulling out an envelope. He held it out, not forcefully, just there waiting. This is to take the pressure off, he said. Rent, bills, food, whatever you need. She didn't reach for it right away. Her hands trembled at her sides. I didn't do it for this, she whispered. I know, Hawk said gently. That's why you deserve it. He placed the envelope into her hands. She looked down. The weight of it felt unreal, like it belonged to someone else's life. Then he handed her a folder. There's more, he said. A job, with Lily's Legacy, community outreach, paid, benefits, stability. The words settled into her chest slowly. Stability, something she'd never allowed herself to want too loudly. Her knees buckled. She sank to the ground, sobbing openly now, her child clinging to her as neighbors stood frozen, watching a woman they thought they knew step into a future none of them had imagined for her. Apologies came next, quiet at first, then louder. I'm sorry, someone said. We were wrong. I judged you. The man who had pointed at her earlier stepped forward, shame written across his face. You were braver than all of us, he admitted. She couldn't speak. She didn't need to. The $8. The cereal counted carefully. The miles walked in worn shoes. The night she almost walked away. It all came rushing back at once, colliding with the moment unfolding around her. $8 had become this. Not because it was money, but because of what it represented. Hawk knelt beside her, lowering himself so they were eye level. You didn't just save my life, he said softly. You reminded us why we do this. She looked up at him through tears. I just did what I could. He nodded. That's how everything worth building starts. Around them, the street changed. Neighbors stepped closer, no longer afraid. Some offered hugs. Others helped steady her as she stood again, still overwhelmed, still shaking, but no longer alone. The engines remained silent. The morning sun rose higher. And for the first time since she could remember, the fear that had followed her everywhere loosened its grip. The $8 were gone forever, but in their place stood something far greater. Relief, vindication, and the undeniable truth that kindness, given freely, had a way of coming back multiplied, strong enough to change a life and loud enough to be heard by an entire street. The crowd eventually thinned, but something new remained behind. Not the motorcycles, not the noise, not even the gifts stacked neatly where fear had once stood. What lingered was a shift so quiet it could have been missed if you weren't paying attention. The kind of change that doesn't announce itself, but settles into a place and refuses to leave. In the days that followed, her life didn't suddenly become perfect. It became purposeful, She showed up to her first day with Lily's legacy nervous and unsure, still half convinced someone would tell her there'd been a mistake. Instead, she was handed a list of names. Families, elderly neighbors, parents working 2 jobs just like she had been, making impossible choices in silence. As she read through the notes, something unexpected happened. She recognized herself in every story. Not the details, but the feeling, the exhaustion, the quiet pride, the fear of asking for help. When she knocked on doors now, she didn't carry authority or judgment. She carried understanding. She listened more than she spoke. She never rushed anyone through their pain. And when she handed someone groceries, or helped fill a prescription, or connected a parent to work that paid enough to breathe again, she didn't see gratitude as a reward. She saw it as a reminder. She had once been on the other side of that door. Her child noticed the difference first. The tension that used to live in the apartment was gone, not replaced by luxury, but by steadiness, by meals that didn't require math, by nights that didn't end in worry, by mornings where hope didn't feel irresponsible. One evening, walking home together, they passed a man sitting on the curb, head down, shoulders slumped. The old version of her might have walked past, too tired to stop. This time, she slowed. "Are you okay?" she asked. The man looked up, surprised, embarrassed. He told her a simple story. Car trouble, no money, a kid waiting somewhere he didn't want to disappoint. She reached into her bag and handed him what she could, not because she was rich, but because she remembered what it felt like to be invisible. When he tried to refuse, she shook her head gently. "Just help someone else when you can." That was how the legacy continued. Not in headlines, not in speeches, but in small moments that looked a lot like the one that started it all. The street that once whispered about her now waved when she passed. Some neighbors volunteered. Others donated. Some simply learned to pause before judging someone by how they looked or where they came from. Hawk kept his word. Lily's legacy grew, but he never forgot the moment that reminded him why it mattered in the first place. And neither did she. If this story has made you uncomfortable, that's okay. Growth usually does. But if you're tired of judging people by appearances, if you believe kindness shouldn't depend on labels, hit subscribe. Stories like this deserve to be told, because the more we tell them, the more likely we are to live them. All it took was $8 and a choice, and the courage to see a human being where others saw something else. She saw a human being, not a vest, not a stereotype. That was the difference. Not courage, not strength, not even sacrifice. Just the ability to look past what the world tells you to fear and recognize a life in front of you. In a moment when walking away would have been easier, safer, and completely understandable, she chose to see a person instead of a label. That choice didn't make her special because of who she helped. It made her special because of who she refused to become. The world is full of reasons not to get involved, full of warnings, full of stories designed to keep us apart, to convince us that kindness is risky and compassion is weakness. But the truth is, fear only wins when we let it decide for us. Her $8 didn't change the world because of its value. It changed the world because it carried intention. It carried humanity. It carried the quiet message that someone mattered, even when they were at their lowest, even when everyone else looked away. So here's the question this story leaves us with. Who deserves your $8 today? Not just money. Maybe it's your time, your patience, your willingness to listen. Maybe it's choosing not to judge the person everyone else avoids. Maybe it's stopping when the world tells you to keep walking. Because somewhere right now, someone is standing where she once stood, tired, scared, and one decision away from becoming part of someone else's miracle. If you believe kindness should come before fear, comment, "I choose kindness." And if you know someone who still believes fear should win, share this story with them. Not to argue, not to shame, but to remind them that sometimes the smallest act of humanity can become the beginning of something far bigger than any of us ever expect. Before we end this story, there's one last choice to make. Because the real villain here was never the man in the leather vest. It wasn't the motorcycles. It wasn't even the fear itself. The real villain was judgment. The kind that tells us who to avoid before we ever learn who they are. The kind that makes walking away feel safer than stepping in. If you believe people should be treated like human beings before they're treated like labels, hit subscribe. Stories like this don't survive on silence, only on people who refuse to let fear write the narrative. If you're not siding with prejudice, comment, "I stand for kindness." Let be clear where you stand. And if you know someone who still believes fear should win, share this story. Not to argue, not to shame, but to remind them that the world only changes when someone chooses compassion over assumptions. Every like, every comment, every share is a stand against judgment, and a vote for the kind of world we say we want to live in. Now, go be someone's $8.